Hey there, this is Bill. This is a time-lapse of my garage renovation I did last year. You might be thinking about renovating your garage or basement or something, and hopefully this gives you a really good idea of how much work it's going to take and maybe gives you some ideas. I would love it if this series could help encourage people to do something similar. This is just part 1, the demolition phase. The goals of the project are to insulate the garage as best we can, to drastically improve the lighting, and to paint it and make it look a lot nicer. The main reason we did this renovation was because my wife was a contractor for some health and beauty companies and was keeping a lot of her inventory in the garage. And in the summer, it was getting so hot that the stuff was melting and separating, and then in the winter, it was literally freezing. For me, that meant that it was always uncomfortable to work in the garage. The main way that I'm getting the drywall off here, the way that worked best, was to take out any of the screws that I could see, which was pretty easy in the middle of these panels because they weren't painted, and then use a reciprocating saw down the seams. Then I would do my best to just kind of yank the panel off the wall. Sometimes I used a hammer to find and chisel out the nails or screws on the edges, and sometimes I would make a hole on the somewhere in the panel just to give myself a place to hold on to. The panels here are about 12 feet long, so it can help to cut them into smaller pieces, but don't go crazy because you want to keep the dust down as best you can, and it helps throwing everything away if they're in big pieces. Since I'm leaving up the drywall on the ceiling, on those edges I would just cut the tape with a razor blade and then pull them down. In total, it took about 8 hours to remove all the drywall and prep for insulation. You might notice that some of the footage here also shows insulation up in some places, and that is because I had to move all the stuff in the garage back and forth so that I had room to work. So this footage is spread out over about a week. You'll probably notice that the lighting in this video and in the rest of the series is pretty terrible. We had a single 100-watt light bulb in the middle of the garage, and I had 2 work lights. I think you'll be really impressed by what we ended up with. You might notice an unusual pattern in the drywall here, and that is because the garage has 9-foot ceilings instead of the typical 8-foot ceiling that you have mostly in homes. So the way they put up the drywall was with a 4-foot wide section on the top and a 4-foot wide section on the bottom, and then a 1-foot piece right down the middle. There are some areas where we didn't need to remove the drywall. The reason is because they were already insulated. This is an attached garage, and the back wall and a section that is about 4 feet long on the north wall back up against the living area. We also aren't touching the ceiling because it's insulated already too. One of the more challenging and annoying places to remove the drywall was on the header above the garage door. Unlike the rest of the room where it's hollow behind the drywall, the header is completely solid, so you can't really grab behind it or get a good grip on it. So I used a crowbar and it worked okay, but the spring support for the garage door is in the way, so you don't really have much room to work. I ended up with lots of tiny little pieces of drywall and just a ton of dust to clean up. Another interesting issue that I had to deal with was the vent for my old water heater. We replaced our regular unit with a high-efficiency tankless unit, and the venting is totally different. So that left us with a random pipe sticking out of the ceiling. It was impossible to get down. It's fastened in there so well, and it's so strong. So I had to cut it off about an inch above where the drywall is, and then I just stuffed it with insulation. That pipe is going to be completely removed here in about a month or two when we renovate the room above the garage. And here you can see that continuity errors that I was mentioning before. We did this well after we had done most of the rest of the insulation in the room. I also figured, since we were cutting open all the drywall, that I would use this as a good reason to open up this small section where we had some water damage previously. It had been repaired when we moved in, so we hadn't noticed it leaking or anything, but I wanted to get a good view in there and just check it out. And it turns out it had been properly repaired and there was no damage there, so but it was good to know that it wasn't going to be an issue. So here is where it really pays to have kept all the drywall in big chunks. You can see that I can get almost all of the drywall that we pulled down from the whole room in one small section. I think I had maybe 3 or 4 bags of dust and smaller pieces off to the side, and the like 4 tiny pieces of insulation that they put in the walls. Having it all organized, though, was really helpful, and when we eventually took it all to the dump, it was super easy to grab everything, toss it in the truck, and take it to the dump. Another recommendation is to make sure you get a very fine filter for your shop vac, because drywall dust will go straight through a normal filter and it will just do no good at all. You can see anytime I use the shop vac here, it just shoots the dust everywhere, and it was terrible. You're also probably wondering why I'm spending so much time cleaning up and vacuuming everything and doing all that. And there's really 2 reasons for it. The first one is because, practically, when you go to apply the sealant foam before you insulate, it will stick much better if it's not all dusty, because you don't want it to just stick to the dust and then fall off. You want it to be able to get inside the gaps, and so it's good to keep them clean. But the other reason is because once you clean all that stuff out, you can see just how bad of a job they did when they built your house. You can see all the tiny gaps, because between the foundation and the footer, the bottom of the boards, there's huge gaps there, and you can put your hand there and you can feel air coming through, cold air. So you know that you need to insulate it, and you know that you need to really air seal it. So that's the real reason. So as I'm wrapping up the demolition phase here, I'll tell you what you can expect in the next few episodes. I have to insulate, put up drywall, tape and mud the joints, prime, paint, and finish, replace that garage door opener, and do a massive upgrade in lighting. If that sounds good to you, and you made it this far, I hope you'll subscribe and follow along. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.